news.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, we're going to get straight on with some news from Germany, and this is the German health minister, Karl Lauterbach, and he's speaking to one of the German, I think it's ZDF, one of the German television channels, but vaccine injuries. Got a few little clips here. He just starts off, well, just have a listen to this first one, and then we'll discuss it.
Der Bundesgesundheitsminister ist bei uns. Vielen Dank dafür und guten Abend, Karl Lauterbach.
Guten Abend, Herr Sievers.
Was sagen Sie denn diesen Betroffenen?
Zunächst einmal, diese Schicksale sind absolut bestürzend und jedes einzelne Schicksal ist eins zu viel und die Menschen tun mir ehrlich gesagt auch sehr leid. Das sind schwerste Einschränkungen und davon wird auch einiges permanent sein, von daher ist das schwierig. Was wir als Staat machen, ist, die Krankenkassen übernehmen halt die Behandlungskosten und also die Länder bezahlen, wenn die Versorgung notwendig ist, die Versorgungskosten.
So the state is going to provide ongoing care for the vaccine injured in Germany, and he claims he's extremely upset about what has happened to the people involved. He went on to say that at the moment there are no drugs available for dealing with these vaccine injured and the injuries that people have experienced. But don't worry, because the pharmaceutical companies are developing, or they're working at a pace to develop the drugs necessary to solve the problems for those that are injured. He went on to discuss the numbers.
Jetzt tun Sie so ein bisschen so auch, als ob eigentlich alles geregelt wäre. Aber wenn man mit diesen Menschen redet, hört man genau das Gegenteil.
Es muss also hier zu einem schnelleren Anerkennen dieser Verfahren, dieser Impfschäden kommen. Und wir bekommen ja jetzt auch langsam ein klareres Bild. Man muss allerdings auch darauf hinweisen, nur dass kein falscher Eindruck hier hängen bleibt. Schwere Impfschäden sind auf der Grundlage der Daten des Paul-Ehrlich-Institutes oder der Europäischen Zulassungsbehörde in der Größenordnung von weniger als 1 zu 10.000 Impfungen. Somit ist es nicht so, dass das so häufig ist.
So he believes that 1 in 10,000 people that have been given a dose of the jab getting some kind of serious adverse reaction, that is very rare. Now, as we'll come on to a Substack that has been reporting on this in a second, but that Substack report makes the point that in Canada, the AstraZeneca vaccine was withdrawn on the basis of 1 in 55,000 adverse reactions. So is 1 in 10,000 rare? It doesn't seem very rare to me when we're talking about multiple millions of people being given the jab. So let's move on then with his next point.
Warum haben Sie, Herr Lauterbach, im Sommer 2021 noch behauptet, dass die Impfung nebenwirkungsfrei sei?
Naja, das war eine Übertreibung, die ich da einmal in einem missglückten Tweet gemacht habe. Aber es war ja nicht grundsätzlich meine Haltung. Ich hatte ja sehr, sehr häufig vorher auch schon zu den Nebenwirkungen der Impfungen Stellung genommen.
Ja,
ich habe zum Beispiel
Sie haben aber auch häufig danach noch gesagt, es gebe kaum oder praktisch gar keine, halt mehr oder weniger nebenwirkungsfrei, haben Sie danach in einer Fernsehsendung von Anne Will noch mal gesagt. Also Sie haben schon immer diesen Eindruck erweckt, dass das Thema Nebenwirkungen eigentlich gar kein Thema ist.
Na, das ist nicht richtig. Ich habe es ja eben gesagt, die Zahlen waren mir ja all die Zeit bekannt. Die sind auch relativ stabil geblieben. Diese Impfstoffe sind ja weltweit eingesetzt worden. 1 zu 10.000. Da kann man jetzt sagen, das ist viel. Und man kann sagen, es ist nicht so viel. Aber es ist ja tatsächlich eine Impfung, die vor sehr schwerer Krankheit schützt.
So here we have him again stating the 1 in 10,000 adverse reactions figure, and very much trying to walk back from the position that he clearly, the journalist that's interviewing them, they're absolutely challenging him on the fact that in the past he said no adverse reactions or no side effects, the vaccines are safe, go ahead and take them. So he's getting a bit of a pushback there. Let's listen to the next little bit.
Stehen die ersten Klagen an, gegen BioNTech, auch gegen andere Impfstoffhersteller. Was glauben Sie, wie die ausgehen werden?
Ich kann nicht spekulieren, das ist nicht meine Aufgabe. Als Minister muss ich da vorsichtig sein. Richtig ist, dass im Rahmen dieser EU-Verträge damals die Unternehmen weitestgehend aus der Haftung befreit worden sind und dass daher die Haftung beim deutschen Staat liegt, quasi wie eben beschrieben bei den Ländern, aber Krankenkassen.
So because of EU rules, the vaccine companies, the pharma companies, not subject to any liability. The liability falls on the state. If there's and there is an ongoing court case against BioNTech at the moment, which will be heard in Germany in April. At least the initial stages of it will be heard in Germany in April. Then the German state, should there be any damages awarded, the German state will be required to pay that. In other words, the German taxpayer. So the German taxpayer who's been on the receiving end of the jabs and the adverse reactions to the jabs, the same German taxpayer that has provided the Pfizer and BioNTech and these types of companies with all the multi-billions of profits that they've had, will have to then pay for the liabilities as a result of any court case that comes out. We've got one final clip here.
Jetzt haben Sie gerade diesen Haftungsausschluss selbst angesprochen. Der führt ja dazu, dass die Pharmafirmen in all diesen Gerichtsverfahren sich quasi zurücklehnen können, weil nämlich der Staat das Risiko übernommen hat. Der muss dann, also Sie, die Bundesregierung, für solche Schadensersatzforderungen, die sich möglicherweise ergeben, gerade stehen. Ist das ein gutes Gefühl, das Sie damit haben?
Was heißt ein gutes Gefühl? Zunächst einmal, ich habe die Verträge damals nicht gemacht, sondern bin in diese Verträge, was mein Amt angeht, hineingewachsen. Und ich glaube, dass es der damaligen Situation geschuldet ist, dass man damals so schnell wie möglich die Impfstoffe nutzen wollte. Und da ist der Staat also in die Haftung gegangen. Vielleicht war das auch richtig, denn es ist besser, dass der Staat also haftet, als wenn mit Firmen lange dann Vergleiche oder Prozesse geführt werden müssen.
So it's better for the state to take on the liability rather than to get tangled up in the weeds of trying to deal with multi-billion euro corporations and so on. Now, before I get comment from everybody else, I just want to make this point. This was the German health minister speaking. This is not a commentator or even a doctor that was, in some way opposed to the idea of vaccination. This is a German health minister. Therefore, politicians in this country cannot ignore these comments. And so I would suggest that what everybody needs to do at this point is to take that video clip and absolutely challenge their MPs about it. Christopher Chope, basically, it seems a lone voice in the House of Commons trying to get some action on adverse reactions in this country in the face of 640 or 645 other MPs that are absolutely against him on this. So I think there needs to be some major pressure placed on MPs, and this, I believe, would give the pressure that could be brought.
It's necessary,
yes.
Yeah. Well, I'll just comment, fascinating to watch him flipping and flopping from side to side and trying to say, not on my shoulders. So under immense pressure there. But think about, I can't remember the exact sum, think about the pitiful sums that the UK government is offering vaccine damaged people at the moment in UK, and think about the stress of applications for people who need support funding because they've been so heavily damaged. And I'd also like to say, if that's comment by the Germans, it was the UK column that way back did an interview with Professor Christian Perron, who was in his former years head of the French vaccination service, and he described what was happening with the whole of the COVID-19 vaccination policy as sheer madness. A man who was later vilified, although I understand his position in France has now recovered. And just anecdotally, Mike, by coincidence, I was talking to a local councillor on the telephone yesterday who told me about the number of people he knew who had either suffered serious injury following a vaccination or were dead. And he was talking about 4 or 5 individuals, and he said to me there are more.
Indeed. So I'd like to get the thoughts of Debbie and David here. Debbie, what did you make of that?
Oh, well, there was a couple of points I'd like to mention quickly. Number one, he called it a vaccination, and I would challenge that. I call it an injection. He also said that he wasn't sure whether 1 in 10,000 was, whether that you would consider that a lot. Well, I can tell you as we go on in the news, it's one of those stories, where they can't have it both ways, because I can show where a 1 in 10,000 risk has effectively led to the removal of an over-the-counter prescription medicine in the last couple of days. So if it's severe enough to do that, then I would suggest to him that it's extremely severe. Also, Pfizer are very busy. We're going to come on to that later. So we'll see what Pfizer are up to, because BioNTech and Pfizer are both splashing the cash. So I think also, actually, one more thing, and I will slip this in quickly because I'm afraid I haven't been able to bring it to the main news today, but I promise you we will talk about it in extra. Dr. Christian Buckland has just brought my attention to an MHRA. It's a committee, a select committee, referring to an investigation that is about to take place with the MHRA, highlighting many of the comments there that German health minister made. So perhaps we can discuss that in extra, and I'm sorry it was brought too late to me to include it in today's news, but it is very, very big news.
Thanks, Debbie. David?
I'm fascinated with the figures, and I hope we can dig into them with the German ministry a little more. 1 in 10,000, that seemed to be 1 in 10,000 per vaccination, as far as I could tell from that clip. And of course, you've got 2 shots initially and then 1, 2, 3 boosters. So does that mean that in terms of human beings, it's 1 in 2,500 or 1 in 2,000? So that's one question. Secondly, he admitted essentially that the process of identifying vaccine adverse reactions is not very good. They're not very quick at recognizing when this happens. So how many are being missed? Again, how reliable is the 1 in 10,000 figure? And 1 in 10,000, just to put that in context, in other areas of dealing with risk in engineering, which is my own line, 1 in a million, a risk of 1 in a million per year is considered small enough to be ignored, because that's the risk that you run essentially driving to work in the morning. A risk of 1 in 1,000 per year is so high that basically you have to stop whatever you're doing and eliminate that. That's sort of crisis time. And in between those 2 figures, which is where we are, you have to do everything you can, everything that's reasonably possible to reduce the risk. That's the legal requirement. So if we're talking about something of 1 in 10,000, there is a legal requirement, health and safety law, for example, to reduce that risk to as low as is reasonably practicable. This is not something where it can just be dismissed, oh, it's 1 in 10,000. That's a figure where action is absolutely required by law now stretching back to the 1970s, that level of risk is unacceptable. And one other thing about the figures, we have a huge amount of excess death. Germany, Europe, Britain, America, all across the Western world, total all-cause mortality is up. And we don't know why. We're told it's a mystery. It might be there's snowing, or, people are being too fat, or they're not taking enough exercise, or they're taking too much exercise. But it's not the vaccines, because that's a conspiracy theory. Well, we don't know anything of the sort. Now, if we have this huge amount of excess mortality, which is not being attributed to the effect of the vaccines, if, for example, a substantial part of that is due to the vaccines, what does that do to the 1 in 10,000 figure? I think it's already vastly concerning. It shows that we recognise that the technical case for the COVID policies fell apart 18 months ago, and we've been reporting on this, but it fell apart at a level of the intellectual argument, of the technical argument. The state's position was gone, but it hadn't been recognised in the corridors of power or in the mainstream media. And here we have the health minister of Germany basically admitting the game's up. It's an astonishing piece of video, and you're quite right, Mike, about its significance.
And David, I'll just add, it comes into my mind that, of course, it's only been in the last few months that the MHRA has stalled, I'll use that description, has stalled its production of the yellow card data. So the impression I get from that is that the MHRA is dragging their own statistics about vaccine damage into the long grass in the hope that people can't see it.
Okay, well, look, here is that Substack report, COVID from the COVID Chronicles Substack. Bombshell from Germany's Federal Minister for Health admits severe COVID-19 vaccine injuries have always exceeded what Canada deemed to be program ending. So the full ZDF report is there because that interview only occupied a part of the ZDF report. So I do recommend that people go and watch the whole thing with subtitles on YouTube. There's a link to it there. What I would just end by saying is, where's the BBC? Because the German media seem to be cottoning on to this, but in this country, silence.
Yeah, as normal.